Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. We are back in the Armwrestling Old School, mother fluffers. Neil Pickup with you in the house. And one more time, I'm joined by the very sexy Mr. Bob Brown. And just for anybody watching the show, you'll notice that myself and Bob, yes, we are colour coordinated. If I'd known you were coming like that, Bob, I would have still dressed the same. Yeah.
That's right. That's
there
right.
you go, son. That's it. That's all, man. Not that bad, huh? If anybody hasn't seen that line from Bob Brown, get yourselves over to the Red Line, Armore's Red Line trailer. There you go. You'll see the very best of Bob Brown right there. And we are also joined by the encyclopedia of arm wrestling that is Canada's own Eric Roussin. Mate, welcome back to the show.
Thanks a lot, Neil. Happy to be here.
Tell you what, we've had some fun in between the last episode. I blew up a computer like a couple of hours before we were supposed to go online. I've had to spend a lot of money on a new one. Hopefully it's a bit sharper and better than the last. Have you noticed any difference, guys? Do I look clearer? No?
More sexy.
I'll take it, Bob.
Yeah, more sexy. Beautiful.
I'll take it. Every single day, dude, I will take that. So, as I always say at this point in time, I'm going to hand over to the man, Eric Roussin, because he is the fella that sets the tone and sets the running order chronologically of how we're walking through arm wrestling. I think we were approaching the 80s at pace, mate, weren't we?
We were. So just to recap where we've gone so far. So the 70s was a huge decade of growth. Throughout the decade, attendance went up, number of tournaments went up, prize money went up. And at the end of the decade, it was airing on ABC, Wide World of Sports for the World's Wrestling Championship. Mm-hmm. It was airing on CBS Sports for the WPAA Worlds and on ESPN for the AWI World Championships. So it was going well.
Like the golden age.
Golden age. But the early 80s kicked it up a notch. The biggest prize money tournament in the 70s had a prize purse of $7,500. In 1980, that almost doubled. In 81, it shot up north of 33 grand, which is about 100 grand in today's dollars. So it got very, very serious in the early 80s.
How was America? Was it big sponsorship or what was the score there?
That part isn't. I know for some. I'll talk about a few different key organizations that came on board around that time. The one that put the biggest events of the early 80s was a man by the name of Maurice Rioux, who lived in the Chicago area, and he formed the International Wrist Wrestling Club. He held a number of wrist wrestling tournaments in the Midwest. Some of them were small local events, but some of them were very, very big. I don't know where his money came from. I don't know if it was sponsorships or what he did for his job, but the 1980 tournament, the International Championships, the prize money was almost 15 grand, and he promoted it a lot, and he wanted a special match, a special draw. So he said, Cleve Dean's the king. I want a super match for Cleve Dean. And at that point, no one really knows who to put up against Cleve. I talked about the last episode when he arm wrestled Virgil Arciero in '78, and that's where he claimed the crown as the best guy on the planet. And Maurice said, I have $5,000 just for the super match. I'm going to give $3,500 to the winner and $1,500 to the loser. And in those days, $1,500 to the loser, that's like over $5 grand today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they suggested, they reached out to Virgil again. Virgil was still considered the number 2 guy, and Virgil was interested in trying again. He had arm wrestled him at the super match in '78. He had faced him again in '79 in a tournament with no luck, but he was up for it. So that. And
just for the people who didn't see the last episode, mate, do you want to just recap on the physicality of these guys in terms of comparative? Because you've got Virgil, who's he's a big dude.
Yeah, but Virgil's about Virgil's about 6'5", 240, 245.
So you're thinking big man.
Big man.
Then you get Cleve.
Cleve Dean was 6'7" at the time, and that in those years close to 470, 480 pounds. So he was big.
So you think bear?
And I don't know. I don't know the dimensions of his hands, but his hands, his hand length was probably, I don't know, over 10 inches from wrist to fingertip. It was a big, big mitt.
Like I've always said, Eric, you wouldn't want him to take your daughter to the pictures.
Yeah.
God damn. Bob's thinking, that's true. You ain't lying. You know what happens at the pictures, Bob. Sorry, Eric.
So they decided, okay, that's our super match. The highlight of the event. Now, just to get back, before I get into the super match, Maurice Ryu and the IWC, he was the first to offer equal left and right hand classes, equal number of weight classes, right and left, equal prize money, right and left, for men and women. That's unheard of. Even today, that's unheard of.
Right.
So he was paying down to sixth place, both arms, every class, men and women.
There's got to be some reason here. Was he a lefty or something? What was the score? Did he have a better left than right? Or
I'm not sure. I don't even know if he was a puller. If he was not an elite level puller, that's for sure. But I guess he just wanted to help grow the sport, and I mean,
was he getting equal draw in right, left-handed, women right, left-handed?
Oh, well, there were less left, but because he was one of the first events to offer left-hand classes, a lot of the pros started arm wrestling left because, hey, the Pattons and the Walkers, all those guys say, I could give me twice as much money. So most of them did participate in both, even though they weren't probably very proficient at it yet. But that was...
Another point, Eric, just before we move forward, mate, it's just reminded me, a moment ago you mentioned that it was wrist wrestling, international wrist wrestling. Now, we had a question after the last episode. Could you guys, it just said, thanks for the shows, great information, but I wanted to understand, what is the difference between wrist wrestling and arm wrestling? So for people who don't know, do you want to just break that down? Any differences, any nuances at that time, anything that sort of defines them as different?
So wrist wrestling, at least in all the big events, was always stand-up. At a table similar dimensions as an arm wrestling table. The non-competing hand would clasp your opponent's non-competing hand underneath the arms. So right in the middle of the table, you would hold hands. You would have to keep your non-competing forearm on the table, and the objective was to bring your opponent's hand to touch the top of your forearm, the wrist or the hand at the top of the forearm. Now, there was a lot less rules in terms of shoulder. For many years, shoulder contact was allowed. So a lot of the guys who got proficient shoved their shoulder behind it and just jammed down. So it was, the rules were, a lot more liberties. There was no shoulder across the center rule. But really the challenge was to bring, the opponent's hand, wrist or hand to touch your forearm. And they needed like 4 refs because they had to look at the forearms, they had to look at the hands, they had to see who was doing what. So it was hard to officiate, and there was a lot of controversy. But that's the main differences. And the reason wrist wrestling, I think, became popular is because that's how they did it in California in Petaluma or in the early days. So it hung around for a while.
So for the guys out there who wanted clarification on that, ladies and gentlemen, there you go. Yeah. And another interesting point, even though, as Eric says, the rules were a little bit more loose, even back then, they still thought that the King's move was a dick.
Yeah.
Hey, Bob, joking aside, mate, you got a fair old King's move going on yourself. You can do a bit of King's moving, can't you?
Yes, because my arm is just as fucked up as Odds and Crazy George and Pascal Girard's. My arm is really as screwed up as everyone else's. Yeah, it only goes, if I could see it on the camera, that's as great as it goes,
Without getting too far off topic, though, was there ever any evidence of a move similar to that, mate, at this point in time, Eric? When was the first time you ever saw anything remotely resembling Kings? I mean, it can't have been around at this point.
Well, I mean, there are some people who had the same elbow issues that Bob demonstrated, like Al Turner famously had. His arm was very similar. So although he didn't have to go underneath the table, because when your arm is that angle, so he would be able to stop people right before the pin, and then at that angle, his sort of elbow locks, and then he just drains the life out of them and pull them back over. So although the shoulder might not be dropping,
like a supinated or hooking King's move almost.
Exactly. So although there may not have been as much dropping below the table, there was definitely reaching a point where the elbow would become locked and he'd be able to do that. So Al Turner was one of the ones who was very successful at it. It is. But below the table, I think that's a recent phenomenon, or at least that so many people are doing it, at least.
The patheticness of the King's move is, the reality is, unless you are someone with a messed up arm, which in the States there's like 3 of us, around the world there's like 7 of us, you cannot do a King's move within the rules, period. It cannot physically be done. So I see all these guys with their arms straight out, down here under the table, and their arm is at that negative angle. Well, call the foul. That's a foul. But no one's calling the foul, so everyone bitches and complains. And, George, of course, Crazy George, his arm is so messed up, he doesn't need to go. He's like you just mentioned about Al Turner. He can just stay on top of the table, and Pascal Girard probably has the worst arm of all of us, honestly. And the same thing, Pascal can stay way above the table and still have his arm not go anywhere near the pad. But that's enough King's move shit.
Well, just while we're on the sort of whole technical angle a little bit here, Eric, we have had a lot of questions on this in terms of when was the real emergence of designated bodies of techniques, arm wrestling forms. So when did you really start to see a shift towards outside arm wrestling, top rolling of any fashion? When was the first sort of recorded dead wrist press? When did you start to see these kind of things coming in? Because a lot of the questions that we had and a lot of the comments we had, you probably read some, were around everybody seemed to be throwing the shoulder in, getting into the hook and driving from there. That seemed to be the predominant style of arm wrestling. Even when it moved away from sort of the classical sideways pushing technique to actually hooking. And there wasn't as much dragging in those days because of the rules and because obviously wrist wrestling, you were almost pitting to, it was more of a pressing motion than a dragging motion.
Right.
When did we start to see that transition? Are we at that stage yet, or have we passed it? Where did you see that?
For top roll, it became hugely popular in the late 70s. The transition, definitely 77, 78, 79, top roll became the big new move, very popular. So that was a clearly distinct event. Something like a flop wrist press, there's so few people who do it, I find, that it's hard to pinpoint. I don't know when it was. I think Jerry Cadorette is probably the one who was obviously most famous for it, and he's been arm wrestling for 30 years. Before that, I'm not sure if there was any top-level pullers pulling that.
Well, if you think about it, the emergence of the flop wrist press probably only came about because the guy that was used to being inside got
top roll,
and he just kept wanting to go sideways.
But here's the nuance that I'm getting at there, Bob, right? Say, for example, I would class myself as one of these guys. I can pull very proficiently with my wrist bows back, but I never do that. If I lose my wrist, I can pull there. Had to do it a number of times in my career, but by choice, forget it. I don't want to be there. If I'm there, I don't want to be there. Now, Jerry Cadorette is putting there. He's attacking in that position. And we've seen now some very proficient pullers who attack from that position, that they're looking for that. Right. And that was really what I was looking at. Was Jerry the first guy that anybody knows of who was attacking?
Yes, I would say Jerry Cadorette was probably the one who started off, being the shoulder roller. He'd get his hand and, he started pressing because people were taking his hand. But then he realized, I'm doing better with my hand broke back and pressing. No one can stop that move. And then he started just to do that move right off the get-go, give people his wrist. And my guess on that would have been like at least 20, 30 years ago is when he decided, you know what? I'm actually doing better with my wrist back. And
and it's a brutally effective move. You get that right? My God, it's horrible. Yeah.
You got to have a lot of faith in your elbow to stay together.
Yeah, you do.
Because it is a devastating move. I tell, my guys that I train, I'm like, look, that flop wrist press is devastating. But generally speaking, it's not if you're going to hurt your elbow doing that, it's when. And so you can train it like train it just in case you end up being there. But I don't specifically go into a tournament to do that move.
Never.
I'll still train it that way in case someone takes my wrist.
Well, it's funny, a guy that I used to train quite a lot, and I came off a pretty famous super match of mine that was televised. And after the match, he came over and he said, "Oh, mate, you never teach us that in training. Why do you never work on that in training?" I said, I'm still learning that. That was like on the job training, you know what I mean? If you risk it, it's sort of like you make a conscious decision to either give up or not, and I always choose to not. But it's not something I would ever have, because, like you say, it's material, but there's I'm going to say unavoidable risk of material damage involved in that move, just the way that you have to engage it. Even to get it to sort of a safe position, it's like you're going through an arc of complete danger. It's like run the gauntlet of where you get something torn out. If you mistime something, not good. You're actually pulling back a great deal, or I've got a lot of back pressure applied in there to get to that position, but it's that.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, Eric, who was the first technical or recognized technical entrepreneur? Who was the first guy? Like you got your guys through the history of the sport, right? Who've come in, and I'm going to name a couple, and Bob, throw in here any time, mate. You've already named one with Jerry. Let's say we talk about Andrew Rhodes. Let's say we talk about Andreas Rundstrom. Guys who had that signature, undeniable, unique style. Who's the first one of them?
Oh, that's really hard to say. I would say Dave Patton was something.
Yeah.
He was a guy we'd never seen when he came in on in '79, and the way he would fight for the setup and his top roll style. Yeah. He was definitely an innovator, and he was one of the big guys to push the strap as well. So he's one name that comes to mind.
The other thing about Dave Patton is he could hook, even though you hardly ever seen him hook. He could hook, he could top roll, and more importantly, which to me is what makes a real technical arm wrestler, is the guy that can transition from a hook to a top roll, from a top roll to a hook in the middle of the match.
Yes.
And Dave could do that. Very, very, very few people could actually do that. And in my opinion, Dave was the most technical guy I knew. And then I
think what you mean by that, Bob, is also, I think, an important sort of little pointer in that would be, you're talking about in the match when you are scratching.
Yes.
Not in a match with a guy that you're controlling and you're clearly. No. You're talking about when you're on the ragged, when the match is on.
Yeah, like when you're on and you're like, if I'm in the hook with someone and I can tell, oh shit, I'm about to lose in the hook and switch it out to a top roll, or roll. That's what I'm talking about. And I would say one of the single greatest technicians I ever met, and now I met him back in 1993 or 94, and he'd been arm wrestling a long time, was a guy out of Canada named Aaron Lingell.
Yeah.
That dude could pull. There was no bad. I don't care where you had Aaron, until you hit the pad, he was in a good spot.
Oh yeah, great dude as well. If Aaron's watching the show, shout out to you, brother, because he's a top guy, and that mother fluffer loves arm wrestling. And just another reference, his brother, that's the dude that discovered Devon Lara. Another little
Dion Rangel, yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Interesting.
And another thing about Aaron is that I remember early when I started pulling, I saw a VHS tape that Aaron put together of 50 different arm wrestling moves. It was now I've lost that. It wasn't my tape, and I've never seen it again. But I love to see it. 50 moves.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's quality. Aaron Lingell, good dude.
I've always considered myself, a technician, and he came down here for a practice one time. Practices are always at my house. John's there, Bill Brezink, Bongard, we're all there. Oh my God, me and Aaron would get on that frickin' table, and for the love of God, neither one of us could finish the other. we'd have matches that would go like 5 minutes in a hook, out of the hook, to a top roll, to a dead press, to a regular press. I mean, it was great, but it was so fun. I was like, this is awesome. You know, I love that. He's a good guy.
Yeah, good dude. Good dude. Loves it, mate. Loves it. So,
if I get back to the IWC International Championships, Cleve Dean, Virgil Arciero rematch. So Virgil says, you know, hey, what can I lose? I'm getting paid $1,500 either way, and it's giving me another chance. So first match, I don't know exactly what he tried. He said he tried something different. His hand got taken. Dean put him down at about 5 seconds top roll.
Mm-hmm.
And he was disappointed once again. But they had basically, for those super matches, the ref said, whenever you want to go. So they would take at least 30, 40 minutes to rest, gave Virgil time to think about, what he wants to do next. Mm-hmm. Dean's already counting the money at this point. Dean's running around. He's doing some celebrity reffing. He's not worried at all. Virgil is really thinking about a game plan.
Dialed, yeah.
And he feels bad. He's like, he doesn't want to be seen as someone who just showed up for the money. Like he wants people to realize he's actually a contender. Mm-hmm. So he said, I'm going to do whatever I can to get my shoulder forward, dive into a hook right off the bat. If I can find a way to get my shoulder and to get arm to arm, I think I have a chance. Second match starts. He executes to perfection, gets right behind it. And then all of a sudden, they're in a war. And gradually, he keeps fighting, and Dean keeps trying to work on the wrist, try to peel out of it, but he can't. He cannot open Virgil's wrist. It takes about 30 seconds, and Virgil wins that match 2.
Whoa.
And the crowd goes wild. Cleve is visibly, he doesn't understand what happened. Like, this is, Cleve hasn't lost many times at this point, and he was not expecting that.
Right.
So that gave Virgil a lot of confidence. They had another 30 minutes or so. Now it was just out of 2 out of 3 this match. So third match for all the marbles for the big money. And, Virgil goes with the same game plan, and he gets it again, right in the middle. And at this point, Cleve is fighting for his lip. He's struggling so hard to avoid being pinned. He starts biting his lip, and blood starts coming down his chin. That's how much effort he's putting into it. But in the end, Virgil, this one is about 15, 20 seconds, he gets the win, and he reclaims the title as the number 1 guy on the planet. So that was they got what they wanted, for that match.
Wow.
Yeah. So
absolutely awesome.
That was the demonstration of what you had to do against Cleve, and not many people have the abilities to get there, but the man was beatable.
Right. Nice.
Making his size work against him to some extent if he could make it that close and that tight, which Virgil obviously had a massive amount of endurance and power in that area, as we saw in the over-the-top tournament.
Right. And Dean was although he was surprised, he was extremely congratulatory. He didn't have any complaints. He's like, he lost fair and square. But he admitted that him and his wife had already spent the money. Like they'd already, they knew what they were going to do with that $3,500. So, oh well.
Wow.
Yeah. And the tournament itself, the usual heavy hitters, most of the heavy hitters were there. Patton won his class. Johnny Walker won. And Fran Brezink. Fran Brezink is John's aunt. Mm-hmm. And he was an arm wrestler in the late 70s, early 80s, and a very good one because she won her class, and that was a big money tournament. She was only active for 2 or 3 years, but clearly it was running in the family because she was a very dominant force.
Let's just focus on the ladies for a minute, mate. At that point in time, you said that this guy actually was the first person to pay evenly for men and women.
Yes.
Who were the top ladies of that time? Who were the ladies that were the most famous? Did you have the dominant ladies and was there different weight classes for the girls in that event?
So in the mid-70s, there was a few contenders, but the first one to really emerge from the pack was Pam Carter from California. Pam Carter, She won the World's Wrist Wrestling Championship in 79. She also won the first WAF Worlds. So she's in 79. I think she started maybe a year or two before, but in 79 she started winning, and I don't think she lost a match for 4 years until she finally met Dot Jones. but Pam Carter was the best in the heavyweight women. And she wasn't even that big. I think maybe she was 150 or 160 pounds, but she was the woman to beat in the early 80s. Now, someone else came on the scene in 79 by the name of Sherry Fibig, out of Michigan, 130, 135 pounds, and she made a splash. She traveled everywhere and basically won everything. Anyway, so those are the two in the early 80s. In the heavyweights, it would have been Pam Carter. Under 135 would have been Sherry Fibig, and extremely dominant. She reminded me a bit of Barb Zalepa in the 90s. She was that good.
Yeah. And where were the girls drawn from? Where were you seeing the ladies? Because at that time, there wasn't really the prominence for female athletes in any strength sport, really. And now you do see the transition of girls coming from various sports and various other strength disciplines now. And it's good to see that, you've got World's Strongest Woman. You've got a lot of strength events that are specifically catering for the ladies in a massive amount of fields, and that's great. What we didn't see back then was that you didn't have the diversity in the strength sports. You didn't have that mix. So was there any sort of evidence of where the girls were being drawn from, where these ladies were coming from? Was there some kind of a tie into some other sport? I don't know, I'm making it up off the top of my head, but something like gymnastics, where, you've got to have a lot of upper body strength. Any evidence of that?
So, some of them I know had like gymnastics backgrounds, but most of them, I think they just lucked into it the same way most of the men lucked into the sport. They found out about a tournament nearby, were invited to come out, or they started competing and just had success and liked it. I know a few had some backgrounds, but it was not the majority. It was people who just discovered the sport and that they liked it and they started training for it.
Interesting. Yeah. So what year was that, mate? What year are we at now?
This is 1980 that I've been talking about so far.
19.
Right.
Okay.
So in 81, same organization, International Wrist Wrestling Club, he triples the money. So we're in $34,000 in the $81, and that was probably his biggest event ever. The 1981 IWC Worlds, same thing, equal money right and left, men and women down to sixth place, and basically everyone, all the top guys are there. And the same people win. Walker, Dean, Patton, Sherry Fibig, they all win their classes. There's a memorable match that happened there. There's two things I want to mention about this tournament. So this is late 1981. Patton has an 11-minute match with Burt Whitfield. 11 minutes. Now, that's the time that was quoted. Since then, I've heard a lot of even further, like 19 minutes, 20 minutes. But anyway, 11 is what I believe. And
which is an unbelievable match.
and people who were there to this day still talk about that match. And in the end, Patton prevailed. But I've never seen footage of that match. I just would have liked to have seen it because that's incredible. But another match. A guy who was there was Ron Bath was there. Ron Bath, 19 years old. One of his very, very first tournaments. He competes in the 200-pound class. And he has a match with Johnny Walker. And the match is tight. And, it lasts about 10, 15 seconds. Then Johnny puts him down. And then Ron goes back, talks to his dad and his friends. He goes, I had a match with Johnny Walker. I almost beat him. And then only to learn after the fact that Johnny was just playing with him. Johnny was doing that with basically everyone. So he realized after, okay. I thought that was
what, mate? Did you ever get cross-category matchups? Because you had the big stars then. You had the guys that were the established dominant champions, no one more so than Johnny Walker.
Right.
Did you ever see Johnny Walker test himself further and take on the likes of Virgil, take on the likes of Cleve? Did that happen often then, or was there any money interest in that?
There was. So a lot of these tournaments, Johnny would typically pull a couple of classes.
Mm.
Clay Rosenkrantz, he was known he would pull every class his weight and above. And if I'll switch gears, I'll talk to you a couple of other events because it flows into what you're talking about here. In 80 and 81, the AAA, American Armwrestling Association, Stand-Up Nationals, were big money events. And that's because of a sponsor by the name of Eric Roussin. He owned one or multiple car dealerships in the Washington, D.C. area. Mm-hmm. And he said, I want to help make these events big. So the 1980 and 81 AAA Nationals were big tournaments. To give you a sense, the winners, so the 81 event had money down to top 6, I believe, $750 for first. You get a championship ring. And then among the class champions, he drew 4 trips to the WAF Worlds in Brazil. So that's nice prizes.
Wow.
Isn't it just? Yeah.
And so at that event in particular, the 81 event, Johnny pulled 2 classes. He pulled the one, I think the classes were a little different. I think he pulled the 195 and the 215. Mm-hmm. Those classes at those events averaged 40 to 50 guys per class. And he entered both and he won both.
Wow.
So Clay Rosenkrantz entered 4 classes. I think he did the 95s, 215s, 245s, and up. So I don't know how many matches he had, but he overextended himself. He only managed to get a couple of 5th place finishes. Mm-hmm. But that's to give you a sense that you would see it among the top guys. Well, John Brzezinski famously did that in later years when he got into sport. Yep. But a lot of those top guys, Patton, Walker, Rosenkrantz, Brzezinski, they all wanted to maximize how much money they could make. So they would go to the money tournaments and pull every class they could.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, I wonder whether, for Johnny, it was a situation at that time where he didn't really have, with the greatest of respect to the guys in his class, when you watch a lot of the early footage of Johnny, until the emergence of Brzezinski and Brzezinski getting into his stride as well, Johnny was like head and shoulders, wasn't he? There was just nobody could do.
To be fair, Clay was close. Clay was, they matched up a lot in the late 70s and early 80s. And Walker probably won 2/3, but it's not like he won every time. Like if you watch the AWI light heavyweight world championships that they had every year in conjunction with the pro football tournaments, they would go back every year. So obviously Clay was able to do something that Johnny did not like. But aside from Clay, I would agree that Johnny was the man at that time.
I always feel like Clay doesn't get anywhere near the respect he deserves, particularly from the modern crop. You know what I mean? You'd see, up to very recently, you'd see Clay knocking about at the events, particularly when you'd go to the Cali events, the UAL stuff and so on. He was there, kicking around. Lovely guy, absolute raw. You know, he still, I don't know how old Clay would be a couple of years ago at the UALs, but, you know, he's been in the sport for easily 40 years in, and still right in the mix, not a backward step in, the dude. I mean, talk about, you got to tip your hat to that. What an hombre. And yet he never gets spoken about in that elite level, and it always puzzles me, because the guy clearly has got pedigree. When he was a young man, absolutely rabid, you know?
For about a 6 or 7 year stretch, maybe even longer, he won a world title and title every single year. The only thing that changed was the weight class in which he won it. Sometimes he won lightweight, sometimes he won middleweight, sometimes he won heavyweight. But between the mid-70s and the early 80s, he won every single year. And these are the tournaments that had 100 people in the class, so single elimination.
Yeah, that's absolutely iron. Clay Rosenkrantz, ladies and gentlemen, we salute you here on the Old School. Yeah. Absolute warrior. What an hombre.
You know, the problem we have with today's arm wrestler, especially with the internet and all that stuff, is if you're not the number one, if you're the second best guy in the world, people just dismiss you as not necessarily being that good. You know? I mean, Bill Brzezinski, perfect example. Bill Brzezinski is a freight train, elite monster. And no one even really knows he was that good because he was the brother to John Brzezinski. Ray Patton, another elite monster. But no one really thought he was that great because of his brother, you know? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, today, we see this thing with Schoolboy versus whatever that guy's name is, and all of a sudden they think this Kayla guy is so good that we need to put him up against Levon. Like, to me, that is just disrespectful to our sport. Like, are you kidding me? You know, that guy would get squashed by 1,000 arm wrestlers, you know, but, he's so incredible. We need to put him against Levon. You know? Have more respect for your own.
I think there's a situation where people will be, they'll hear someone's talk about a man's potential and the obvious natural talent that he has at a time in the sport, and then they instantly wind the clock forward as though he's been competing 8 years and dedicated as hell. There's a very big difference.
Huge difference. Yeah, very
huge difference. There are in arm wrestling there are levels, you know.
Right.
And those levels are very evident when you get into the sport.
And no disrespect to Schoolboy. I mean, he's a strong kid. There's no question about it. And the internet world probably thinks he's the greatest arm wrestler that's living right now. But the fact remains, there's 100 guys in the States that would kill him. You know?
But he's only a baby yet. I mean, Alex is just a puppy. He's 22 years old or something. And again, got mega potential. Alex, you know, you can't knock Alex. He's going to be a beast. But he's just, at the moment, he's still a baby and he's still cutting his teeth. He's doing really well, really solid puller, great potential, but by no means the finished article yet. And I'm sure he'd tell you exactly the same. You know, so.
Yeah. So, all right, we digressed.
That 1981 Nationals, Sherry Fibig, who I mentioned earlier, she pulled both weight classes. She pulled 135 and under, 136 and above, and she won both. So that's to give you a sense of how dominant she was for a lightweight woman.
Yeah.
And what kind of entries were they getting back in those days for the women? Like 10 people in a class, 20, 50, what?
I don't have those figures. I would expect it's probably closer in the 15, 20 range. It wasn't 50 like the men, but there was still very good for those. Yeah.
Try to get that many today. It's hard. It's difficult. So that's awesome. Fantastic.
Yeah. So those two series of events, the IWC and the AAA, those were huge money events, much more money given out in those years than previously. But that wasn't the only one. There was a new organization called the World Professional Wrist Wrestling Association that was formed in the Georgia area. And it was only operational for a couple of years. But those were other tournaments that had $10,000, $15,000 prize purses. And who lives in Georgia? Cleve Dean, Johnny Walker, all the same guys would just go and get their money. In 81, another Marvin Cohen. Marvin Cohen, if you look at the history all the way back to the early 70s, Marvin shows up every 5 or 6 years with something else. They're not always the same level of success, and there are some failures along the way. But every few years, like clockwork, he comes back and does something amazing. In 81, he formed an organization called Pro Arm Sports.
Yeah.
Held a $16,000 tournament in Southern California. $16,000 cash. You know, it was a one and done thing. You know, obviously he went big and then disappeared. But for those who attended, that was a great tournament.
Marvin gets he gets negative press because of some things that have gone sideways on him.
Right.
But I think everybody got to take your hats off to Marvin Cohen, because if Marvin, and Marvin's a real character. When you meet Marvin, he's one of those guys who is, he's cut from the character rock, isn't he? There's no doubt about it. Yeah. But what he's achieved, what he's done for the sport of arm wrestling, is absolutely monumental. Nobody can ever take that away, and I think everybody needs to doff the cap a little bit to Marvin Cohen. I'll certainly have a drink in the man's name, because, just for the over the top.
Right.
Did anything ever bring more people to arm wrestling than that? I don't know whether it did. It was like pretty bloody mega. So, Marvin Cohen. Good on you, brother.
Yeah.
What a man. What a guy. I mean, he is. He's mark on this thing, big time.
It surprised me to learn, but made a lot of sense when you told me Marvin Cohen and Steve Simons used to room together.
Right.
Because they're like one and the same. They're both showmen. They're both bigger than life showmen putting on the big, huge event, you know, and so, yeah, that was interesting when I learned that from you.
In 1981, just to give you a sense of how I put together a little list of what Dave Patton won in 81. Just to give you a sense of what he won. And this isn't all his titles, but these are some of the bigger titles. In 81 alone, he won the AAA Stand-Up Nationals, the IWC Internationals, the Carling and Keefe Worlds in Canada, the WPWA Worlds, the WPAA Worlds, the World Wrist Wrestling Championship, the IWC Worlds with both arms, and the WAF Worlds in 81.
I love what, though. I gotta say it. I do love that they're all called the Worlds.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
All of
those years.
Oh, yeah.
That's why the old timers, some of them have 30, 40, 50 world titles because of that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, you know, Alan, the Fish has had some, you know, he's had so many world titles. And everybody, well, yeah, there's a difference between Engin Terzi's and Alan's.
Right.
Well, that is to say that Alan Fisher, a prime Alan Fisher, was a very, very formidable arm wrestler at any time against anyone in his weight class.
Absolutely.
And that's the distinction. So you go into any arm wrestling circles and speak the name Alan Fisher, and everybody's like, that's some kiddie, that is.
Oh,
you know, because I can arm wrestle.
Yeah, you've got Alan Fisher that's still somewhat on the scene today. Like, people still know who he is. Cobra Rhodes, people still know who he is. But not so much Dave Patton. So people always talk about who was the greatest lightweight ever. And now, Eric, you'll probably know better than me, but I'm pretty sure that Dave Patton has a winning record overall on both and Alan Fisher. Like,
I don't have the exact records, but I think you're right.
Yeah.
And he was the lightest of the three.
And say that again?
And he was the lightest among the three.
And exactly. And Dave Patton was the lightest of the three. So
I'm gonna throw in a little comment here, though. Okay. And this is not meant to be. Take this comment for what it is. I do genuinely believe that on occasion, for reasons, I don't know what reasons, okay, but I do think that when you were competing against Dave in the States, or I watched some of the other guys competing with Dave in the States, Dave was favoured by the organisation and the referees. And that is not to detract from Dave. Dave's doing his job. It's not Dave's fault. But Dave would set up with his hand over the moon and get away with some stuff. I remember completely unbiasedly, and I love Dave Patton. Dave Patton is one of the greatest arm wrestlers of all time. He's a lovely bloke. He's iron. But I watched him pull with Andrew Rhodes in, I think it might have been Houston, Texas at the World. But he got away with murder on the setup. I am talking, there is no way that Cobra was the weaker individual that day. Just no way. Yeah, I mean, everybody, we were all at the front watching and going, what the is going on? It was, Cobra would have won that match if it had been anything like fair. So, I don't know about winning records, and maybe Dave was a better puller. I genuinely don't know, but I know there were times where I believe he got the rub of the green a lot. You know?
I always, and I'm not going to disagree with that or agree. It is what it is.
It is what it is, yeah.
When people start talking about, the greatest lightweights of all time, you just got to go with W's and L's. I mean, wins and losses, and the weight. Like when you start discussing pound for pound, Dave has winning records on those guys, and like Eric said, Dave was always 10 pounds lighter than those guys. Always. Yeah. I mean, I've
seen Dave lose close matches to John Brzenk and be like really, really angry at himself that he lost.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No.
You know what I mean? Most people, you lose a match to John Brzenk, a strong John Brzenk, and you'd be like, oh, I did well there, Can somebody get that on video? Dave was like really angry that he lost, like he was pissed that he lost. What a competitor. That says a lot about the man.
John lived with Dave for a while, and they trained every day together. And, back in those days, Dave probably won most of the matches, but by the end of it, then, John started to become John. So, but yeah, I mean, anytime I talk about the greatest lightweights ever, like if I had to pick the greatest lightweight ever today, and when I say lightweight, I'm talking guys 165 pounds and down. My number one guy right now is Ingen Tiersey. My number two guy is Dave Patton, without question. But that's my opinion. Everyone's got their opinion.
Yeah, of course. I think the two names you mentioned are without question on that list. There are other guys in there that, as I say, I saw a different perspective on it, but I saw Cobra do some amazing things.
Yes.
Amazing things. Like anyone who was in Vladikavkaz, Russia in 1999, my God. And I mean, Geneva, 1992.
Yes.
Paris. My God, Cobra pulled off some stuff there that he has no right to do.
In 1992, I was at a tournament. I was at a tournament in Indianapolis with John Brzezinski, Cobra Rhodes, Chad Silvers, Frank Wilkowski, Terry West, whole bunch of monsters are there. And Cobra pulled like 3 classes, including one with John. And he folded back John's wrist like it was on a well-oiled hinge. Mm-hmm. Now, John, his wrist is back, and John came out the side and they slipped, and then they went into the strap, and it was a different situation. But in 1992, a guy weighing 165 pounds folds back John Brzezinski's wrist. Heck, he beat Gary Goodrich. I mean,
mate, I saw him having his way with Gary Goodrich in London when they were training at the Unit 4. They came over here for the International. I'll tell you what, his wrist and hand that day, off the scale. And we were, it's things like that when you've seen it happen over time, year after year after year after year, and you're thinking, if you encapsulate the very best of that guy on any given day, I'm not sure how good he was. But I'll tell you what, he had some little moments where he was biblically good.
If you recall when we were talking earlier, like who had strong hands in that day, I had very strong hands back then, and me, Dave Patton, Cobra Rhodes, and Alan Fisher. Like I said, Dave Patton or Alan. Oh Lord, Cobra Rhodes by far had the strongest hand of the 4 of us by a minute. Straight back pressure, Dave Patton clearly all day long, and then I think my hand was probably the second strongest. Dave could just take my wrist because of his back pressure was stupid, and then just the sheer size of Fisher's hand was just so hard to deal with.
So we would need a longer show. Yes. To discuss the greatest lightweights, that's for damn sure, and I'd love to hear Eric's comments on that. But I'll tell you what it is. If walking away from the stadium in 1999 Vladikavkaz, Russia, after watching Andrew Cobra Rhodes do his thing, we walked past the river and that mother had parted it, I wouldn't have been surprised. That's all I'm going to say.
Yes. Oh, wow. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are 48 minutes into this episode, and it wraps up this one from the old school. But let me tell you now, don't go anywhere. We're going to be back very, very soon. Eric's only warming up. Ladies and gents, if this is your first time on the Supernatural Strength channel, please like, share, subscribe. Knock that bell on. You'll see a lot of stuff coming out from us. And more importantly, our Arm Wrestling Archives. Tell them where they got to go, Eric, to find out all about this stuff.
Right. It's just a website called thearmwrestlingarchives.com and has a lot more information on that, everything we've talked about. And the Facebook page is Arm Wrestling Archives Facebook page, and that I update stuff almost every day, little tidbits.
Yeah,
ladies and gentlemen,
the job you
get
do
yourself over there. Oh, go Bob. I mean,
it's unbelievable to me. I mean, these archives, because I know the amount of time that it takes to research this stuff. And it is, I mean, my hat off to you, sir. It's unbelievable what you've done for this sport to allow people to learn where all this came from. It's crazy.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
The only thing you got wrong is you picked the wrong guy for the best arm wrestler in New Jersey. But that's okay. I'll let you slide. I'm the guy who taught Paul how to arm wrestle, but that's okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, the arguments rage on, and I hope this episode has given you guys at home something to talk about as well. As I said, stick with it, guys. We'll be back very, very soon with another episode of The Old School. Till that time, take it easy, peeps.
Bye-bye.